Welcome to the Intellectual Anarchy podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
And I'm Catherine Cruz, and I'm just a curious cat.
Chapter 13 is titled Left of Boom. And that's because most investors like to look at the hockey stick growth. And that's all they focus on. And to get to that hockey stick growth is what we're going to talk about and how we kind of do this. And for what we do at Oceanit, it actually works out well because we create a risk-adjusted portfolio with three flavors of risk: technology, execution, and market. And market is roughly 50% of the risk. Mitigate market risk with abundant capital, which we don't have, although today we can access all kinds of things. But this process creates a portfolio ahead of the market. And when the market shows up, we actually have something. And that's contrasted with how a lot of things are done today. In particular, it's really clear in the federal government. So they only do things when there's a requirement. But left of requirement is where the really interesting ideas are and the innovations happen. And the U.S. is kind of, in the government sector, especially Department of Defense, has stopped doing that because they're trying to be more efficient. I only work on things there's a requirement. However, they don't get to what are the things we should be doing? What are the needs? And so what we've learned is a process to look at needs versus requirements, which become needs. And that's what this chapter is about, left of boom, because everybody's focused on boom. Left of boom is what happens before the explosion.
So you want to make sure you've got something in the pipeline.
Right.
And if it's all in the timing, you need to make sure you can pull something out of the hat.
Well, and so I was on a call earlier this week. It was a group in the government. But we had done a project with Shell Oil off of Rio de Janeiro. And the idea was to look at broadband for 10,000 feet below the surface to connect all their machines. And so we developed that. Now, in developing it, Shell, we collaborated with them, and then, we had others put in money. But then Shell in particular said, we're no longer doing the deep ocean. I kind of put that on ice. We're going green. And so all that was put on hold. But we had actually built a system and did some demos. We could do the early version, we did a gigabit per second, but the one we put in the ocean was 100 megabit per second with what's called a TCP/IP protocol, which is how the internet works in your house, sending packets and that kind of stuff. So we ran that for several months, 40 feet of water. It's pretty cool how it works because it literally is just like an internet, but it's down underwater.
Deep sea, wow.
And so, but then when Shell says we're no longer doing the deep ocean, we thought, okay, we'll put it on ice for a bit. Now, how many years later, they've come back, Shell has in particular, and said, we're going back to the deep ocean, Gulf of Mexico. All the things that were out were in, and now the things that were in were out. And so all of a sudden, here we are, we have a capability to do broadband at the bottom of the ocean. But out of the blue comes a group in Department of Defense, and they'd heard about this. And I said, yeah, we actually already built it, demonstrated it. And they're saying, well, can you help us with this thing? And so we're likely going to put together something and they'll try it out. But we didn't, when the interest stopped, we didn't stop because what happens is the interest kind of ebbs and flows. It's about being at the right place in the right time to address the market. At this point, we're in a pretty good spot because the market is now saying, I want this. Like the big energy companies are back in the deep ocean. And here comes out of the blue, somebody from Department of Defense saying, how about that deep ocean stuff, right? We're saying, well, actually, we got something right here.
We have it, yeah.
And now we can say, well, let's go do a demo, right? And they're saying, well, can you build me a whole bunch? And we're thinking, yeah, we can do that too. But it's about timing. And the way to mitigate timing risk is, of course, with lots and lots of capital. Or what we do is we have a risk-adjusted portfolio. So we put it in the portfolio. If the market kind of turns on us, which it does, we just kind of put it on ice, and the market will turn back. Now, when Obama was president, there was a lot of work on greenhouse gases. And then when Trump came in, he said, we don't do greenhouse gases. And then Biden comes in and says, we care about greenhouse gases. Now, when Trump comes back, he may dismiss all that work. But at the end of the day, everybody knows greenhouse gases are a problem. So somewhere in the future, the technology that we've been developing is exactly what the market needs. Mm-hmm. So we don't just throw it out the door. We may kind of slow roll it, wait for the market to come back. But we've done this multiple times.
Well, I was excited to learn about, this new technology that we're going to have in space for astronauts that I remember as a kid reading in Dune, the novels, the trilogy, and was like, wow, we're here, It's amazing.
Well, and so Dune is interesting because it's a picture of the future. Hopefully parts of it are a long ways out. But being able to exist with scarce resources, mm-hmm. forcing us to recycle things as straightforward as urine. Where does shishi go? Well, one thing is you throw it in the ocean or you pump it down a hole. But if you're in the middle of a desert and you don't have much, maybe you reconstitute it so it's drinkable. Yeah. The technology's there. And I'm guessing what's happening in space is they're realizing that although they're getting serviced periodically, FedEx is coming up and dropping off, and they've got things going on. They still got they've got a scarcity of certain things, and if they run out of basic things like water, and of course oxygen, they're going to have a bad day. So ways to conserve it, recycle, of course, is the big deal. And now with more going on in space, it's going to be just like in Dune. Yeah.
So left of boom.
Well, left of boom is interesting because the way we think of it, and we have this disciplined process of last quarter of the year trying to ask ourselves what is interesting and important. Interesting and important is a kind of a philosophic question. What should we think about? And we'll pick a thing we think is important and interesting, and then we'll kind of weigh into that. And it's almost always years ahead of most everybody in the world. But we kind of lean into it and explore that space. And in the future, a requirement will come, pretty much always. But in the beginning, there is no requirement. And so the confounding issue for a lot of folks, especially in organizations like Department of Defense, is that they can only work on a requirement. We work on things before there's a requirement, but almost pretty much always a requirement will show up where we have something. Because we thought about what was interesting and important, and we've learned to get comfortable with how we think, and it turns out that future, it's coming. And by the time it comes, we actually have something. So that's actually why that works for us, because we're able to explore those spaces before anybody does. And by the time a need shows up, a real requirement that says, I need X, we've done most of the hard work. Now we're just trying to perfect it. Back to this underwater broadband technology. What depth you guys want to be at? Really basic things, because we've already shown that it works.
Right, you're just going to fine tune it.
We got to fine tune it for the particular need, but of course we can just make it. And now it becomes an engineering question, access to the right materials, but the really kind of magic of, is this a crazy idea? We've worked through all that. Turns out it's not a crazy idea.
Right, you just get yourself in a position so when the timing is right, you can fire it off.
Right. And we do this through this idea of managing a research portfolio. So we don't try to guess the market. The market will tell us what it wants, when it's ready. So we know it'll happen, but we don't know when. It's very hard to guess the market. And it's funny, I was on a call yesterday with a group that's looking at economic diversification. And the question they said is, so what should we focus on? We need a subject category. And I said, well, the first fallacy is people say, well, we're in the middle of the ocean. Let's focus on building an economy around seawater. And I said, so that's a ridiculous idea. Or how about we've got beaches, so let's make an economy on beaches. Well, we can put tourists on beaches, but other than that, not a whole lot to do. But I said, in fact, what we've overlooked, I said, for example, a friend of mine, classmate, had worked on the ability for what was called a side scan sonar with a towfish, meaning I can take a 3D map of the bottom of the ocean. They were instrumental in mapping out all the fiber around the planet. Now, how do you predict ahead of time you're going to have fiber and we're going to have broadband? You can't. So I said, don't pick a subject, focus on creating a really good environment. And then the new opportunities will come. But if you think you're going to tell the future, I'm pretty sure you're going to be wrong. And I said, you would never have predicted that, or I was explaining a company called Verifone from Hawaii. Verifone moved offshore from Hawaii to access capital when it was growing, but it was this wireless credit card checking, a credit card payment. How do you predict that ahead of time before there's anything? If you say, well, we're going to build an industry around this thing, it doesn't exist. I said, it only works if you're saying, I live in a community with tons of coal, so let's mine coal. And I said, that's the traditional neoclassical economic model. But I said, what we should be focusing on, and a lot of parts of the country should be focusing on, is a utilization of human capital to create innovations that create business in commerce based on ideas. But I said, if you think you can predict the future because here's the idea, I said, who would have figured large language models would be what they're doing today? Nobody really could have predicted that. The timing around it. So NVIDIA with the GPU, the chip, you could say the guy's a genius or he's lucky. More often than not, he's just lucky. And he's a smart guy. But he was focused on gaming, and at that time in history, I'm sure a lot of people didn't care about gaming and kind of dismissed it. Turns out you can use the same platform for these large language models. So guess what? He's in hot demand. It's good to be lucky. But see, it's about waiting for the market to arrive and having the right thing at the right time to go fast. That's exactly what he did.
I was on a military ship recently and looking at the equipment, and they look like joysticks for video games.
Yes.
You know, and all the kids that grew up on video games are just now in a whole different sphere.
And that's exactly where things like defense are going, right? They're making what they do more like being in a video game, except you can have real consequences. Whereas, in the video game, you just might, get up and be another character. In the real world, that doesn't work. However, the technology is moving so fast that those platforms are exactly how they're doing things. And you add layers of AI, graphics, visualization, advanced sensing. That is the future of defense and security. And that's what they're bringing to this. And so what's really interesting about this recent RIMPAC in Hawaii is the interaction of all these different groups and countries communicating, sharing data, sharing information to work together. But again, innovations around communications, protocols, graphics, and the people that have the advantage are, of course, people that spend a lot of time on games because, this is how we used to play the game. And now I'm driving a huge, ship. And I'm shooting real stuff, but it kind of looks
like video games.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you got a whole younger generation of people that just step right into that, and they're building systems to accommodate them, which is really the right way to go. So there is innovation going on in Department of Defense, and that's one of the areas I think that's doing better.
Yeah, but you imprinted an operating system for this next generation, right?
Right.
Yeah, and see where it
Exactly.
goes.
Yeah. So it's interesting to get to left of boom. The portfolio becomes the pipeline because you're waiting for the market to reveal itself. And then the way that we kind of expand on these things, we've literally mapped out this process we call intellectual anarchy. It's 4 quadrants. And you kind of cycle back and forth between these different areas. So we've got deep science, insightful understanding, conceptual prototypes, and functional prototypes. So it's like you've got a cool idea in science, but you're trying to demonstrate that it actually works. And that sometimes, like we're doing this thing on directed energy, producing hydrogen. And so we started out with a technology that we bought, which was produced, it was a directed energy system that was built by, turns out parts were built by Russia. And so we got it working. And then we were told you can't use those parts because we can't buy them. So we had to rethink the whole thing. So there was a lot of risk. But then turns out we came up with this really crazy idea about how to pump energy into the fluid. We're not cleaning the fluid or filtering or anything. It's just salty, briny water. So think of intense salt water. And turns out we're producing hydrogen like crazy, and it's pretty cheap. And so we looked at it optically, and we're seeing these really cool wave fields going on that are changing quickly inside the fluid. We don't quite have all the physics figured out, but it's definitely producing hydrogen, and it seems very efficient. So there's a surprise element, right? So we're going from this, we had a cool idea in science, and then we tried to build something, and it worked, but then we couldn't do something, so went back to the drawing board, tried it again. This time it worked better. It could have worked worse.
Yeah, but you're onto something.
But it works way the heck better than we thought. And now we're building kind of a bigger prototype demo to show it. And eventually, the real issue is we have to build a big scale system, like a big facility. But this is kind of how it happens, right? It's like we had a cool idea, sort of got it working. Then we had a problem that we had to figure it out, tried a new thing, and we're all surprised because it's working so much better. We thought we knew what we were doing, but you wouldn't have known unless you actually ran it. Mm-hmm. And now we're explaining the physics, and that gives us predictability to go to scale. And we think we can produce hydrogen for really cheap. Department of Energy was saying we need to get to below $1 a kilogram. This may be half that price.
Wow.
So it turns out, whoa, that's crazy. But it's hard to predict that.
Right. You wouldn't have gotten to that point if someone said, no, you can't go this way anymore. You got to go that way.
And we had to explore it. We had to try it, then build it, then demonstrate it, then work through all those problems. That process we've mapped out in this graphic called Intellectual Anarchy. And the reason we title it that is because we'd like to just all make a really clear plan and follow exactly step 1 to step 10. It's just not how it works. When you're really innovating, you have to explore ideas. You have to test theories. You have to discover things you didn't expect. You have to solve problems you've never seen. And that's really how innovation happens. And it's a really good example of exactly that because it's like, holy crap, this thing looks pretty cool. And now the thing we're sorting out is how do we scale faster? Now we're talking to a lot of big energy companies, and they really, well, can we get it today? It's early. We're not ready, but we are surprising ourselves to go, holy crap, that just happened. And we did it again, and we did it again, and we did it again. And we're going, well, something's going on. Mm-hmm. And so now we're trying to come up with the right physics model, which we think we're getting to, so we can scale it and predict it.
I just talked to someone who did a film on Dick Brewer, who's a master shaper of surfboards.
Absolutely.
And he mapped out, what he did. They went from running longboards to shortboards, and then he, developed that, and then they went on to boards for toe windsurfing. So as the sport evolved, he looked at the physics and how do you harness the wave, the energy in the wave, and to get these athletes on these boards to go to do what you want to do. So it's kind of the same thing. It's just like you.
It is. It's this experimentation. It's understanding the science, but you bump into the edge of science. It's like, I don't know the answer, so I try it. And then you say, wow, okay, that worked. You try to rethink the theory. You try it again, and you keep perfecting it. And so what happens is you walk up right to the edge of science and say, okay, this is what we think science tells us, but I don't know, let's try it. Let's try this idea. The willingness to try it and to find out, wow, that didn't work, or that was really cool, right? And that's how it really happens. But you got to be willing to walk up to the edge of the abyss, and a lot of people are afraid to say, well, I don't know what's going to happen next. But you got to find out. That's what makes it fun. But a lot of people are not comfortable because it's like, I need to know the answer before I ask the question. Having a good question and then getting an answer is what we're talking about. And so it's exactly that. It's shaping it, trying it, surfing it, reshaping it, trying it again, getting other people to use it, getting all that kind of feedback and going back and forth until you say, all right, got something, man, that's really cool.
Yeah, the name of this film is The Shape of Things.
Nice. That sounds like a really cool film.
Yeah.
But surfing is a really interesting innovation because think about how audacious it is to say we're going to ride a wave and then we're going to ride a monster wave.
Yes.
That's insane. And yet you see people do it in the art form. So, I mean, it's funny. I was just, there was a nice write-up in the New Yorker on Jocko and the North Shore. Jocko's also a roofer. So I know him from roofing. And all the innovation that happened in surfing, now people come and they want to surf pipe. There was a time when people didn't know how to surf pipe. There's just so much learning. And that's the beauty of surfing, by the way, is I call, it's applied hydrodynamics, right? You're living it, you're feeling it, you're testing it. And there's physics involved in everything, but it's different when it's visceral. And it's kind of confirms what you know. But then sometimes it's like, okay, what just happened? And so you look at pipeline, the people that surf that, the athleticism, the reflexes, what it takes to do what they do, it gives you a deep appreciation about the athlete, right? The last ingredient there. You have this incredible board, but the athlete brings it to a whole new level. And what that'll do too is eventually push the board and new ways to use it.
The Shape of Things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very cool.
All right. Any I don't know, any final thoughts?
Well, I think this has been an interesting journey to go through these chapters and talk about ideas behind the chapter and the thinking that went into it, the things that informed it. And there's more work to do, and I've been asked about the next book, so I'm not sure I'm ready for that. But what we're doing is we're trying to take things that we've learned and make them accessible to people so that others can do the same kinds of things. The world needs lots of innovation to make the world a better place, to deal with so many challenging issues from climate to healthcare, access to resources, are we going to mine the moon? So many things out there. That's all going to be driven by innovation. And so the world needs lots of this. And the more we can get people around the world to become part of it, I think the more the world moves in the right direction. So for a place like Hawaii, we're really a metaphor for a lot of places that may feel isolated. They may feel they're not connected. We are in the middle of the sea, But we're not isolated. We're not alone. And we can innovate with the best of them because we're only limited by our imagination in education. And so I think once people realize that, you can see this popping up in a lot of places around the world. It's a little contrary to traditional economic ideas that focus a lot on geography. But I think if there's one thing that we should all be kind of questioning is, before COVID, geography had a more prominent role. Now after COVID, Zoom became a word and a verb. Zooming, it's a way to connect with people. And it's not as good as being in person, but it really changes everything. So it's good to spend time with people in person, but you could do a whole lot on Zoom and being connected. And that connected world is just starting.
So what we've learned from Anarchy.
Absolutely. And how COVID transformed the world. Right? So there's all of these things we're just starting to learn about how the future is going to roll out. And COVID left an imprint on how people work together. And what it did was it helped defeat geography.